On this edition of Independent Sources, Immigrant Influence, how the city's growing foreign-born population is changing New York.
I think we can say that New York will continue to be a very highly diverse city. And one of the reasons is because of this massive immigration that shows no signs of stopping.
And shaking off the U's, helping public school students graduate through the power of paint.
We're targeting the underperformers in our lowest performing schools. We're not targeting the high achievers.
Those stories and more coming up on Independent Sources. Welcome to Independent Sources, bringing you news from New York's ethnic and immigrant communities. I'm Garry Pierre-Pierre. New York has always been a city of immigrants. Recent studies indicate that's now the case more than ever before. It's estimated that over a third of the city's 8.2 million population is foreign-born. That works out to be about 1 in every 3 people you see walking down the street. 1 in 3 is also the title of Professor Nancy Foner's most recent book about the city's growing immigrant population. I sat down with Foner, who is a distinguished sociology professor at Hunter College. We talked about how immigrants are influencing New York City's growth and what the Big Apple could look like in the future. Dr. Foner, why is New York still a special place for immigrants, and what are the immigrants' impact on the city in return?
Well, New York has always been a special place for immigrants. You know, it's America's quintessential immigrant city. And actually, that's one of the reasons people are drawn here, because there are already large communities of people from their country of origin. But there are a lot of things that make New York special. It's always been an immigrant city. The vast majority of people in the city have a close immigrant connection. It's an incredibly diverse immigrant city, unlike a lot of immigrant cities in the country where 1 or 2 groups dominate. And typically in many cities, it's Mexicans who overwhelmingly dominate. That's not true in New York. There's no top 1, 2, or even 3 groups that dominate. It's like people come from all over the world, but it's not just, you can say that, but there are large numbers from many different places.
Like, for instance, when you're in San Francisco, it's a very Asian city, and South Florida is Miami is a very Latin city, and New York.
Well, and many cities are very Mexican.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Los
Dallas,
Angeles, Chicago, Houston. I mean, Mexicans are almost 30% of all immigrants in the United States. So, you know, there are a growing number of Mexicans in New York. They are now the 3rd largest immigrant group, but there's still only 6% of the total. And you take the top 3 groups in New York, so it's Dominicans, Chinese, and Mexicans, and they're still around 30% of the total. So they're not, there's still 70% of other immigrants.
You know, you've been writing about this for the longest time. I remember I used to quote you back in the 90s when I worked as a reporter for the Times, and we've had all these conversations. But this book is particularly of interest to us because you talking about immigrant New York in the 21st century. How different is it today?
Well, I mean, one of the things I just told you, Mexicans, who were a tiny population in 1990, they're a large population today. There are other new groups. Bangladeshis, Pakistanis are new on the immigrant scene. West Africans, who are a very small number in 1990, have grown a lot in numbers since then. So there are new groups that are coming. There are new neighborhoods. We think, for example, Washington Heights is a Dominican neighborhood. Well, it still is a Dominican neighborhood, but there are now more Dominicans in the Bronx than in Manhattan. We think of Chinatown as a Chinese neighborhood. It is, but there are more Chinese in Brooklyn and Queens than in Manhattan. So, there have been changes, partly given the sheer numbers that are coming, and also new groups coming. And they continue to have, an impact and can spread out into new occupations, changing the city.
Speaking of impact, what impact is, technology, this whole notion of transnationalism is having on the essence of immigration these days compared to 20 to 100 years even?
Well, 100 years ago, it's a lot different because you didn't have jet planes, you didn't have telephones. But it's even interesting, even when I started working on immigration, I won't tell you how long ago that was, but even if you look, say, to the early 90s, you'd say, oh, people are telephoning home, they would, dialing on their landlines, and it was expensive.
Very expensive.
Now, cell phones, everyone's got a cell phone, and it's cheap. Skype, email, it makes it quite different. When I just started out my career doing field work in a Jamaican village where they had no phones at that time. But even 1990s, there were many communities didn't have phones. Now there are more cell phones in Jamaica than there are people. So people can call up every day and speak to relatives in New York.
Are people coming here for this old American dream, or is there another reason driving immigration to New York?
Well, I think there's always many of the same reasons driving the American dream. People are coming here because they think they can make more money, because they can have a better lifestyle than they can in their country of origin. I would say, overwhelmingly that's the main reason. There are political reasons why people from some countries are coming. There are relatives here who, once the migration gets going, relatives can send back the money to help people migrate. They can sponsor them legally. So, I think once the migration begins, it tends to take on a life of its own. But ultimately, yes, people come here thinking they're going to have a better life, and maybe even more so, a better life for their children. So that.
In the book, Dr. Foner, you talked about the Caribbeanization of the city's black population will persist, and you also mentioned the Africanization of that will become more prominent. Now, it begs the question, will that change the definition of what's African American as we know it today?
Well, that's a very good question, to which we really don't know the answer. But, one thing, will Americans, non-black Americans, become more sensitive to ethnic distinctions among blacks as a result of this migration of people from the West Indies, people from Africa? Maybe, we may be seeing that already. The other issue is, well, what about the children of the Caribbean and African immigrants? Will they become African American, or will they inject new elements into the culture of New York City? And will they also think of themselves, well, we know they often do think of themselves as African or Nigerian or Ghanaian or Jamaican. The big question is, how will other people view them?
Exactly.
And the question is, will other people begin to recognize that?
My experience is that other people see you as black.
Well, that has been what has happened so far. Okay. That is true. That is what has been happening so far. So a question mark is, is this massive immigration, because the numbers are really large, does it have the potential to perhaps tweak, as one sociologist calls it, tweak notions of this monolithic blackness? And we really don't know yet.
Okay, well, we'll be watching that. The other question is we know the top 10, it's listed in your book. What are other groups that are emerging but haven't broken into that top 10?
Well, we mentioned earlier Bangladeshis and Pakistanis are two examples of groups that are, none of the African groups are in the top 10, and I don't know. When you put them all together from West Africa, they're large, but the figures look at by country. Mm-hmm. So, and in fact, even by country, Russia doesn't always make it into the top 10, or the former Soviet Union.
Yeah, that's pretty diverse, as we're finding out now with what's happening with the Ukraine and the other former.
Exactly.
Because that's not a monolithic group at all.
No.
And let's talk about that. We seem to lump them into one group, but in fact, what are the distinctions? What are the differences?
Well, there are ethnic differences within countries, where there are class differences within countries. Everyone isn't the same. Some social scientists don't like the notion of, treating these groups in a kind of monolithic way as the Dominicans or the Jamaicans, because they say it flattens out a lot of the differences. And certainly they're even greater. Look at Indians. There are Muslim Indians, there are Hindu Indians. They're quite, they've got different religions.
Catholics. I have a neighbor who's Indian Catholic.
Yeah, so there are, we need to be sensitive to these differences within the groups and not just sort of think of them that way. Although actually that may be an improvement, because many New Yorkers just say Asian, which really flattens out the distinction.
It's pretty huge.
Right.
Now, I know in the book, again, you mentioned that scientists, social scientists don't like to predict the future. But I will hark back on a conversation I had with you 20 years ago when I asked you this question. I asked you, what tenor will New York City be in terms of immigrant and its new comers. And I remember you told me it will be an Asian city. So now,
Well,
today, what city will New York be?
well, it's going to be a multicultural, diverse city. I mean, Asians, yes, have grown. 1980, 3% of the city was Asian. Now it's 14%.
Exactly.
The only reason the black population has stayed the same, really, is because of the infusion of black immigrants. Hispanics are now up to 29%. That's not a great change, but it's an improvement, not an improvement, an increase. And whites have declined again. I mean, the 33% of the city is non-Hispanic white. You know, will that keep going? I don't know, but I think we can say, and one of the things, again, that distinguishes New York is that it's going to continue to be a very diverse city, because there will be continued inflows of immigrants. I mean, at the same time, of course, the population is dynamic. People leave, people die, and new people come in. And the people who come in are not all from other countries. There's also people coming in from other
the
parts.
Midwest,
Yeah,
from the South.
I mean, yes, come from other parts of the country, particularly, you know, highly educated people coming to work in the financial sector or coming to CUNY journalism school, right? So we have, so I mean, there is this, you know, churning all the time. So, but I think we can say that New York will continue to be a very highly diverse city. And one of the reasons is because of this massive immigration that shows no signs of stopping. I think as long as the United States allows in a large number of immigrants, which so far it seems that it is doing, and here I'm talking about legally, I think that New York will receive a significant share and the city will continue to be diverse.
Dr. Nancy Foner, thank you for a fascinating conversation.
Thank you.
Professor Foner's book is available online and in bookstores. Still to come on the show, a campaign to end the New York Police Department's ties with immigration authorities. Before that, Abby Ishola has some other news.
Thanks, Gary. Here's a look at some headlines from the ethnic and community media. New marijuana rules in Brooklyn could lead to fewer arrests, according to the Amsterdam News. Brooklyn District Attorney Ken Thompson says he will no longer prosecute people caught with 20 grams or less of the drug. This after activists asked Police Commissioner Bill Bratton and Mayor Bill de Blasio to stop arresting people found with small amounts of marijuana. The Amsterdam News got a hold of a confidential memo sent to the NYPD that says the initiative is to ensure that young people of color don't become unfairly stigmatized by engaging in nonviolent conduct. According to the memo, if a person caught with the drug has a history of selling drugs to children or a record of driving under the influence, the leniency will not apply. From the Brooklyn paper, public advocate Letitia James is pushing for developers to speed up the process of building affordable housing in downtown Brooklyn. James says affordable housing is the best way to stem the tide of gentrification and make the area more racially balanced. But the process of building the Atlantic Yards residential units has been slow. 50% of the building will reportedly be designated to affordable housing. The project was originally supposed to be completed by 2016, but a new study finds that it could take up to 2 more decades to complete. Some Dominican leaders are criticizing Bronx Borough President Ruben Diaz Jr. for not having any Dominicans appointed to senior roles in his cabinet, El Diario La Prensa reports. Diaz responded to the criticism, saying his team is extremely diverse and that his staff secretary and one other employee are of Dominican origin. From News India Times, one group has launched a new program designed to promote the physical, emotional, and mental health of South Asian seniors. The South Asian Council for Social Services designed the South Asian Health Initiative in collaboration with various New York City-based organizations that cater to the South Asian community. The group recently screened several seniors to evaluate their blood pressure, the possibility of diabetes, and cholesterol. Their goal is to make seniors self-reliant. And finally, Voices of New York profiled one woman who is on a mission to celebrate Portuguese culture in New York. Ana Ventura Miranda, founder and director of the Arte Institute, created her organization in 2011 after years of elected officials and marketing experts discussed ways to move forward but failed to make any plans. Since then, the Arte Institute has held over 100 events, including short film festivals, celebrations of Portuguese writers, and performance events. Miranda has now expanded her organization to Portuguese-speaking countries such as Brazil and Angola. She's also done a few events in England and France. Those were just a few headlines from the ethnic and community media. Independent sources will be back right after this.
Thanks for staying tuned. Earlier, we talked about how immigrants are changing the face of New York City. But while some immigrants are becoming the bedrock of the city, others feel like they're standing in quicksand, with a sinking feeling that immigration officers will come storming through their doors at any time. A new campaign called ICE Free NYC is trying to alleviate some of that anxiety. A number of grassroots immigration advocate groups are calling on the NYPD and the Department of Corrections to stop their collaboration with Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE. I spoke with immigration advocate Abraham Paulus about what the groups behind the campaign want to achieve. Abraham Paulus, welcome back to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Talk to us about ICE Free New York City. What is it exactly?
Well, ICE Free NYC is it's a campaign. It has two components. It's an educational campaign and then an advocacy campaign. What we try to do with the education component is educate New Yorkers about what is going on with detention and deportation and how New York City is involved in that. And then we also have an advocacy campaign. And we've got three major points on the advocacy sort of front, and that is, one, to end all collaboration between Immigration Customs Enforcement and the New York Police Department and the Department of Corrections. The second major point is that we want New Yorkers to feel safe going to city agencies or getting services in the city without the threat of detention or deportation or the apprehension by ICE officials. And thirdly, what we want is sort of, I would just sort of say, an attitude and more of a tone that allows New York City to use its resources to keep families together, such as, affordable housing, using it for education, as opposed to using resources to detain and help ICE deport New Yorkers.
You've been at this for a while now, and this campaign is kind of catchy, ICE Free New York City. Are you getting more sophisticated from a marketing, public relations standpoint?
Well, we're learning, and I do want to give a really big shout out to the Migrant Power Alliance, which is sort of an alliance with different organizations in New York City that are grassroots, directly affected, that have helped us sort of, I guess, bring campaigns to 2014.
What kind of tractions have you gotten? Is the city council on board? Is the mayor's office on board in this campaign?
Well, I think more of the traction that we've gotten is really with the grassroots and really in the communities. With the traction sort of as far as the mayor's office or city council, there was a New York Daily News article that Albo Ruiz did a great piece on. And finally, the de Blasio administration, the city administration, did respond. So we find that to be a positive step in the right direction as far as at least acknowledging that there is this campaign that wants to sort of have this discussion and conversation around really making New York City safe for its immigrants, which is, the legacy and the heritage of New York City.
You took Mayor de Blasio to task for not including people convicted of violent or serious felonies. Why do you think these people who are convicted criminals have rights to be with their families?
Well, I do want to make one clarification, is that de Blasio's administration has only been, sort of in an administration in the city for a very short time compared to the Bloomberg administration.
4 months, 5 months compared to 12 years?
Right, for a very long time. And so initially, when we were addressing the issue, was really addressing New York City under the Bloomberg administration by sort of saying there were two legislations that were passed through the detainer in 2011 and then also in 2013. So when it comes down to that administration, we are sort of hopeful. De Blasio gave great rhetoric during his election saying that we're going to move New York City towards a very sort of progressive tone. Going back to the issue around violent felonies, convicted criminals. Now, the criminal justice system, as it stands, already has safeguards in place that says when a person, once they have served their time, that they are allowed to reintegrate back into their communities.
But isn't there a law in the books, federal law, that if they're not legal immigrants, that if they're not documented, that they can be deported to their native country?
Well, That definitely is in the federal court system, definitely. It's not just for those that are undocumented, it's a green card holder such as myself, asylum seekers, people on student visas, work visas, and all of that. So it's essentially non-citizens.
Non-citizens,
It just doesn't mean undocumented. Now, the federal law has their law, and they have their own sort of mechanisms and apparatus and systems that allows them to do their federal work. What we're asking, right, is asking New York City to establish a bright line between what they want for New Yorkers to feel safe. And I think de Blasio's, ran on the platform by saying safe and accessible. The issue with convicted criminals when we're looking at the city jails is that, again, we already have a system that involves judges, prosecutors, defendants that figure all that out for the community and for public safety. What they're saying is that, oh, well, federal law, sort of immigration law, it's not a crime. It's a civil violation. So folks being held in Rikers Island or in the city jails are really not being held for a criminal warrant. And around the country, federal judges are ruling in this favor. There was a ruling in Oregon, and there was also a ruling in Pennsylvania that happened in the last couple of months that essentially said holding non-citizens, right, in local law enforcement jail is unconstitutional. And that's what we've been saying the whole time, is that we understand that the federal government and ICE has their job to do. We don't agree with it as advocates, but we understand that that's where they're coming from. We want New York City to sort of be a leader in the separation between city agents.
But how realistic is that? As you know, post 9/11 world, America in particular, law enforcement agencies have been chastised for not sharing information, for not collaborating enough. So now you coming in and saying, look, we don't want you to collaborate on this issue. How likely you think this message is to be embraced, will be embraced by NYPD or any other law enforcement for that matter?
I mean, it depends if they embrace the Constitution, right? So we have a federal judge saying that, look, this is unconstitutional, you can't do this. And so what we're asking for is consistency. We're not asking for anything special. When it comes down to New York City, the mayor of Philadelphia just signed an executive order limiting the collaboration between local law enforcement. The sheriff in Chicago has a very strong policy. We also have other policies in San Francisco, New Orleans, Washington, D.C., even Newark, New Jersey has addressed the issue. And so our question is look, where is New York City as far as being, a city of immigrants that have always provided, safety?
Shelter.
Exactly. I mean, and what we're saying is that we understand what the federal law is, but we're saying is that is the city overstepping its laws? Is the city holding us unconstitutionally?
Unfortunately, we're out of time, Abraham.
Understand.
Abraham Paulos, thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much. Glad to be here.
When we come back, the power of pen and how that's helping public school students graduate. Finally from us, you know that old saying, words have power? Well, apparently so does paint, more specifically color. That premise inspired one New Yorker to start a program that for 20 years has been helping public school students stay in school. Zyphus LeBrun tells us more about the Publicolor program.
Over the years, the Publicolor program has gotten teams of public school students and corporate volunteers to transform schools and playgrounds all over the city, from this to this.
We actually won the highest award in the country, the President's Service Award, in 2000 from President Clinton for our work with volunteers in the community. And these volunteers come primarily from corporate sponsors. We have over 1,200 volunteers with us every year, painting alongside our students and informally mentoring them.
These students at PS 50 on Manhattan's Upper East Side are volunteering to paint their school after hours as part of the Paint Club stage of the program. Ruth Landy Schumann started Publicolor in October 1996. She was a recent graduate of the Pratt Institute, whose research examined the power of color over emotions. To her, humdrum use at many public schools made them feel like prisons rather than places of education.
And I thought if I put a paintbrush in the hands of disaffected students, the ones who are good at put graffiti on the walls, the ones that are going to drop out, the ones who are truant, whatever, they will end up owning their schools and they'll feel proud of their schools.
From all accounts, she's been able to do just that. Publicolor boasts that 100% of the students who enter their program stay in school and go on to college.
We're targeting the underperformers in our lowest performing schools. We're not targeting the high achievers. Some of my kids become high achievers, but they don't start out that way.
Vladimir Tobar is one of the program's high achievers, who's returned to work with the new generation of hopefuls.
I think the most important thing has been the fact that they are able to see somebody that comes out the same neighborhoods that they're coming in and actually making it, out of the system and into something, that they can actually graduate from high school and college. So I think it gives them inspiration, motivation, and, I could share that experience with them.
Tobar, like many of the program's graduates, received a GAP scholarship that helped him through Morgan State University and on to graduate from the City College of New York.
There's a GAP scholarship that Publicolor provides, so it's meeting the gap between financial aid and the real cost of college. Financial aid provides some help, but there's the transportation aspect of it, there's books, and then just living, being able to eat, all that is important while you're in college.
The GAP scholarship that Tobar received is just one aspect of the multi-tiered program that includes the Next Steps program, the Summer Design Studio, and the Color Club.
Color Club acts is opening kids' eyes to the resources and the opportunities that they may have to pursue this college, this idea of a career. We always start with health and wellness as a module. So we talk about nutrition, physical wellness, mental wellness, healthy relationships, all of these things, and that's how we start our school year. And then we go on to, this year we covered financial literacy. So we're just finishing our financial literacy module. And then we're going to do publishing and then art and design.
The Next Steps is more focused on the practical means of preparing for college.
How to write the essay, how to maximize your access to financial aid, dealing with cognitive dissidence, wanting one thing and doing something different, but all the things related to college.
Then, during the summer, students get fully immersed in the design program, where they're taught marketable skills.
They develop a product from concept to prototype, and we follow through with utilizing the best resources and also the best supplies. And so last summer we designed a tote bag, and kids learned 3 sewing techniques, and we had wool and canvas and all this material that was really high end, so that kids designed these beautiful creations.
Only 75 students are accepted into the full program every year, so one of these students who's volunteering at PS 50 may have a chance to get in. Rio says the selection process is always difficult, but the smaller class sizes allow them to have more of an impact on the students.
I want kids to take away the idea that they have a unique thing to share with the world. I think a lot of kids, not just our student body, children, young people who are of this age group feel out of control or that they don't matter. I want to eradicate the idea of this apathetic, like I don't matter.
Zyphus Lebras, Independent Sources.
That's our show this week. Thanks for staying tuned. Till next time, be independent-minded.